Chapter 2.4. Does objective truth exist? Bogdanov declares, as I understand it, Marxism contains a denial of the unconditional objectivity of any truth whatsoever, the denial of all eternal truths, Empirio-monism, BK. 3, pp. 4v. What is meant by unconditional objectivity? Truth for all eternity is an objective truth in the absolute meaning of the word, says Bogdanov in the same passage, and agrees to recognize objective truth only within the limits of a given epoch. Two questions are obviously confused here. 1. Is there such a thing as objective truth? That is, can human ideas have a content that does not depend on a subject, that does not depend either on a human being, or on humanity? 2. If so, can human ideas, which give expression to objective truth, express it all at one time, as a whole, unconditionally, absolutely, or only approximately, relatively? This second question is a question of the relation of absolute truth to relative truth. Bogdanov replies to the second question clearly, explicitly and definitely by rejecting even the slightest admission of absolute truth and by accusing Engels of eclecticism for making such an admission. Of this discovery of eclecticism in Engels by A. Bogdanov we shall speak separately later on. For the present we shall confine ourselves to the first question, which Bogdanov, without saying so explicitly, likewise answers in the negative. For although it is possible to deny the element of relativity in one or another human idea without denying the existence of objective truth, it is impossible to deny absolute truth without denying the existence of objective truth. The criterion of objective truth, writes Bogdanov a little further on, p9, in Beltov's sense, does not exist. Truth is an ideological form, an organizing form of human experience. Neither Beltov's sense, for it is a question of one of the fundamental philosophical problems and not of Beltov, nor the criterion of truth, which must be treated separately, without confounding it with the question of whether objective truth exists, has anything to do with the case here. Bogdanov's negative answer to the latter question is clear: if truth is only an ideological form, then there can be no truth independent of the subject, of humanity. For neither Bogdanov nor we know any other ideology but human ideology. And Bogdanov's negative answer emerges still more clearly from the second half of his statement: if truth is a form of human experience, then there can be no truth independent of humanity, there can be no objective truth. Bogdanov's denial of objective truth is agnosticism and subjectivism. The absurdity of this denial is evident even from the single example of a scientific truth quoted above. Natural science leaves no room for doubt that its assertion that the earth existed prior to man is a truth. This is entirely compatible with the materialist theory of knowledge, the existence of the thing reflected independent of the reflector, the independence of the external world from the mind, is a fundamental tenet of materialism. The assertion made by science that the earth existed prior to man is an objective truth. This proposition of natural science is incompatible with the philosophy of the Macans and with their doctrine of truth. If truth is an organizing form of human experience, then the assertion that the earth exists outside human experience cannot be true. But that is not all. If truth is only an organizing form of human experience, then the teachings, say, of Catholicism are also true. For there is not the slightest doubt that Catholicism is an organizing form of human experience. Bogdanov himself senses the crying falsity of his theory, and it is extremely interesting to watch how he attempts to extricate himself from the swamp into which he has fallen. The basis of objectivity, we read in Book the First of Empirio-monism, must lie in the sphere of collective experience. We term those data of experience objective which have the same vital meaning for us and for other people, those data upon which not only we construct our activities without contradiction, but upon which, we are convinced, other people must also base themselves in order to avoid contradiction. The objective character of the physical world consists in the fact that it exists not for me personally, but for everybody. That is not true. It exists independently of everybody, and has a definite meaning for everybody, the same, I am convinced, as for me. The objectivity of the physical series is its universal significance, p. 25, Bogdanov's italics. The objectivity of the physical bodies we encounter in our experience is in the last analysis established by the mutual verification and coordination of the utterances of various people. In general, the physical world is socially coordinated, socially harmonized, in a word, socially organized experience, p. 36, Bogdanov's italics. We shall not repeat that this is a fundamentally untrue, idealist definition, that the physical world exists independently of humanity and of human experience, that the physical world existed at a time when no sociality and no organization of human experience was possible, and so forth. We shall now on an exposure of the Machin philosophy from another aspect, namely, that objectivity is so defined that religious doctrines, which undoubtedly possess a universal significance, and so forth, come under the definition. But listen to Bogdanov again. We remind the reader once more that objective experience is by no means the same as social experience. Social experience is far from being altogether socially organized and always contains various contradictions, so that certain of its parts do not agree with others. Sprites and hobgoblins may exist in the sphere of social experience of a given people or of a given group of people, for example, the peasantry, but they need not therefore be included under socially organized or objective experience, for they do not harmonize with the rest of collective experience and do not fit in with its organizing forms, for example, with the chain of causality. 45. Of course, it is very gratifying that Bogdanov himself does not include social experience in regard to sprites and hobgoblins under objective experience. But this well-meant amendment in the spirit of anti-fideism by no means corrects the fundamental error of Bogdanov's whole position. Bogdanov's definition of objectivity and of the physical world completely falls to the ground, since the religious doctrine has universal significance to a greater degree than the scientific doctrine. The greater part of mankind cling to the former doctrine to this day. Catholicism has been socially organized, harmonized and coordinated by centuries of development. It fits in with the chain of causality in the most indisputable manner, for religions did not originate without cause. It is not by accident that they retain their hold over the masses under modern conditions, and it is quite in the order of things that professors of philosophy should adapt themselves to them. If this undoubtedly universally significant and undoubtedly highly organized religious social experience does not harmonize with the experience of science, it is because there is a radical and fundamental difference between the two, which Bogdanov obliterated when he rejected objective truth. And however much Bogdanov tries to correct himself by saying that fideism, or clericalism, does not harmonize with science, the undeniable fact remains that Bogdanov's denial of objective truth completely harmonizes with fideism. Contemporary fideism does not at all reject science, all it rejects is the exaggerated claims of science, to wit, its claim to objective truth. If objective truth exists, as the materialists think, if national science, reflecting the outer world and human experience, is alone capable of giving us objective truth, then all fideism is absolutely refuted. But if there is no objective truth, if truth, including scientific truth, is only an organizing form of human experience, then this in itself is an admission of the fundamental premise of clericalism. The door is thrown open for it, and a place is cleared for the organizing forms of religious experience. The question arises, does this denial of objective truth belong personally to Bogdanov, who refuses to own himself a Machin, or does it follow from the fundamental teachings of Mach and Avenarius? The latter is the only possible answer to the question. If only sensation exists in the world, Avenarius in 1876, if bodies are complexes of sensations, Mach, in the analysis of sensations, then we are obviously confronted with a philosophical subjectivism which inevitably leads to the denial of objective truth. And if sensations are called elements which in one connection give rise to the physical and in another to the psychical, this, as we have seen, only confuses but does not reject the fundamental point of departure of Empirio-criticism. Avenarius and Mach recognize sensations as the source of our knowledge. Consequently, they adopt the standpoint of empiricism: all knowledge derives from experience, or sensationalism: all knowledge derives from sensations. But this standpoint gives rise to the difference between the fundamental philosophical trends, idealism and materialism, and does not eliminate that difference, no matter in what new verbal garb, elements, you clothe it. Both the solipsist, that is, the subjective idealist, and the materialist may regard sensations as the source of our knowledge. Both Berkeley and Diderot started from Locke. The first premise of the theory of knowledge undoubtedly is that the sole source of our knowledge is sensation. Having recognized the first premise, Mach confuses the second important premise, that is, regarding the objective reality that is given to man in his sensations, or that forms the source of man's sensations. Starting from sensations, one may follow the line of subjectivism, which leads to solipsism: bodies are complexes or combinations of sensations, or the line of objectivism, which leads to materialism: sensations are images of objects, of the external world. For the first point of view, that is, agnosticism, or, pushed a little further, subjective idealism, there can be no objective truth. For the second point of view, that is, materialism, the recognition of objective truth is essential. This old philosophical question of the two trends, or rather, of the two possible deductions from the premises of empiricism and sensationalism, is not solved by Mach. It is not eliminated or overcome by him, but is muddled by verbal trickery with the word element, and the like. Bogdanov's denial of objective truth is an inevitable consequence of Machism as a whole, and not a deviation from it. Engels in his Ludwig Feuerbach calls Hume and Kant philosophers who question the possibility of any cognition, or at least of an exhaustive cognition, of the world. Engels, therefore, lays stress on what is common both to Hume and Kant, and not on what divides them. Engels states further that what is decisive in the refutation of this Humean and Kantian view has already been said by Hegel, 4th Germ. Ed. Pages 15 to 16. 1. In this connection it seems to me not uninteresting to note that Hegel, declaring materialism to be a consistent system of empiricism, wrote, "For empiricism the external, das Äußerliche, in general is the truth, and if then a supersensible to be admitted, nevertheless knowledge of it cannot occur, soll doch kein Erkenntnis des Lebens, d. h. des Übersinnlichen, nicht stattfinden können, and one must keep exclusively to what belongs to perception, das der Wahrnehmung angehörig." However, this principle in its realization, Durchführung, produced what was subsequently termed materialism. This materialism regards matter, as such, as the truly objective, das wahrhaft objective. Hegel, Enzyklopädie der Philosophischen Wissenschaften im Grundriss, Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences in Outline, Werke, Vi. Band, 1843, s. 83. Cf. s. 122. All knowledge comes from experience, from sensation, from perception. That is true. But the question arises, does objective reality belong to perception, that is it the source of perception? If you answer yes, you are a materialist. If you answer no, you are inconsistent and will inevitably arrive at subjectivism, or agnosticism, irrespective of whether you deny the knowability of the thing in itself, or the objectivity of time, space and causality, with Kant, or whether you do not even permit the thought of a thing in itself, with Hume. The inconsistency of your empiricism, of your philosophy of experience, will in that case lie in the fact that you deny the objective content of experience, the objective truth of experimental knowledge. Those who hold to the line of Kant or Hume, Mach and Avenarius are among the latter, insofar as they are not pure Berkeleyians, call us, the materialists, metaphysicians because we recognize objective reality which is given us in experience, because we recognize an objective source of our sensations independent of man. We materialists follow Engels in calling the Kantians and Humeans agnostics, because they deny objective reality as the source of our sensations. Agnostic is a Greek word. A in Greek means no, gnosis knowledge. The agnostic says, I do not know if there is an objective reality which is reflected, imaged by our sensations. I declare there is no way of knowing this. See the words of Engels above quoted setting forth the position of the agnostic. Hence the denial of objective truth by the agnostic, and the tolerance, the Philistine, cowardly tolerance, of the dogmas regarding sprites, hobgoblins, Catholic saints, and the like. Mach and Avenarius, pretentiously resorting to a new terminology, a supposedly new point of view, repeat, in fact, although in a confused and muddled way, the reply of the agnostic. On the one hand, bodies are complexes of sensations, pure subjectivism, pure Berkeleyanism. On the other hand, if we rechristen our sensations elements, we may think of them as existing independently of our sense organs. The Macans love to declaim that they are philosophers who completely trust the evidence of our sense organs, who regard the world as actually being what it seems to us to be, full of sounds, colors, etc., whereas to the materialists, they say, the world is dead, devoid of sound and color, and in its reality different from what it seems to be, and so forth. Such declamations, for example, are indulged in by Petzold, both in his Introduction to the Philosophy of Pure Experience and in his World Problem from the Positivist Standpoint, 1906. Petzold is parroted by Mr. Victor Chernov, who waxes enthusiastic over the new idea. But, in fact, the Macans are subjectivists and agnostics, for they do not sufficiently trust the evidence of our sense organs and are inconsistent in their sensationalism. They do not recognize objective reality, independent of man, as the source of our sensations. They do not regard sensations as a true copy of this objective reality, thereby directly conflicting with natural science and throwing the door open for fideism. On the contrary, for the materialist the world is richer, livelier, more varied than it actually seems, for with each step in the development of science new aspects are discovered. For the materialist, sensations are images of the soul and ultimate objective reality, ultimate not in the sense that it has already been explored to the end, but in the sense that there is not and cannot be any other. This view irrevocably closes the door not only to every species of fideism, but also to that professorial scholasticism which, while not recognizing an objective reality as the source of our sensations, deduces the concept of the objective by means of such artificial verbal constructions as universal significance, socially organized, and so on and so forth, and which is unable, and frequently unwilling, to separate objective truth from belief in sprites and hobgoblins. The Macans contemptuously shrug their shoulders at the antiquated views of the dogmatists, the materialists, who still cling to the concept matter, which supposedly has been refuted by recent science and recent positivism. We shall speak separately of the new theories of physics on the structure of matter. But it is absolutely unpardonable to confound, as the Macans do, any particular theory of the structure of matter with the epistemological category, to confound the problem of the new properties of new aspects of matter, electrons, for example, with the old problem of the theory of knowledge, with the problem of the sources of our knowledge, the existence of objective truth, etc. We are told that Mach discovered the world elements, red, green, hard, soft, loud, long, etc. We ask, is a man given objective reality when he sees something red or feels something hard, etc., or not? This hoary philosophical query is confused by Mach. If you hold that it is not given, you, together with Mach, inevitably sink to subjectivism and agnosticism and deservedly fall into the embrace of the immanentists, that is, the philosophical Menshikoffs. If you hold that it is given, a philosophical concept is needed for this objective reality, and this concept has been worked out long, long ago. This concept is matter. Matter is a philosophical category denoting the objective reality which is given to man by his sensations, and which is copied, photographed and reflected by our sensations, while existing independently of them. Therefore, to say that such a concept can become antiquated is childish talk, a senseless repetition of the arguments of fashionable reactionary philosophy. Could the struggle between materialism and idealism, the struggle between the tendencies or lines of Plato and Democritus in philosophy, the struggle between religion and science, the denial of objective truth and its assertion, the struggle between the adherents of supersensible knowledge and its adversaries have become antiquated during the 2000 years of the development of philosophy? Acceptance or rejection of the concept matter is a question of the confidence man places in the evidence of his sense organs, a question of the source of our knowledge, a question which has been asked and debated from the very inception of philosophy, which may be disguised in 1,000 different garbs by professorial clowns, but which can no more become antiquated than the question whether the source of human knowledge is sight and touch, hearing and smell. To regard our sensations as images of the external world, to recognize objective truth, to hold the materialist theory of knowledge, these are all one and the same thing. To illustrate this, I shall only quote from Feuerbach and from 2 textbooks of philosophy, in order that the reader may judge how elementary this question is. How banal, wrote Feuerbach, to deny that sensation is the Evangel, the Gospel, Verkundung, of an objective Savior. Feuerbach, Samtliche Werke, Expand, 1866, s. 194-95, a strange, a preposterous terminology, as you see, but a perfectly clear philosophical line. Sensation reveals objective truth to man. My sensation is subjective, but its foundation, or ground, Grund, is objective, s. 195. Compare this with the quotation given above where Feuerbach says that materialism starts from the perceptual world as an ultimate, Ausmacht, objective truth. Sensationalism, we read in Frank's Dictionary of Philosophy, Dictionnaire des Sciences Philosophiques, Dictionary of the Philosophical Sciences, Paris, 1875, is a doctrine which deduces all our ideas from the experience of sense organs, reducing all knowledge to sensations. There is subjective sensationalism, skepticism and Berkeleyanism, moral sensationalism, Epicureanism, too, and objective sensationalism. Objective sensationalism is nothing but materialism, for matter or bodies are, in the opinion of the materialists, the only objects that can affect our senses, a tender nose sense. If sensationalism, says Schwegler in his History of Philosophy, Dr. Albert Schwegler, Geschichte der Philosophie im Umriss, Outline History of Philosophy, 15 Tafel, s. 194, asserted that truth or being can be apprehended exclusively by means of the senses, one had only. Schwegler is speaking of philosophy at the end of the 18th century in France, to formulate this proposition objectively, and one had the thesis of materialism, only the perceptual exists, there is no other being save material being. These elementary truths, which have managed to find their way even into the textbooks, have been forgotten by our Miggins. Notes 1. C. F. Engels, Ludwig Feuerbach and the End of Classical German Philosophy, K. Marx and F. Engels, Selected Works, Volume 2, Moscow, 1958, p. 371. 2. Skepticism, a philosophical trend that casts doubt on the possibility of knowing objective reality. It arose in ancient Greece as early as the 4th to 3rd centuries B.C., Pyrrho, Ensimus, Sextus Empiricus. The adherents of ancient skepticism drew agnostic conclusions from the premises of sensationalism, making the subjectivity of sensation into an absolute. The skeptics insisted on the need to refrain from any definite judgments about things. They considered that man cannot go beyond his sensations and determine their truth. During the period of the Renaissance, the French philosophers Michel Montaigne, Pierre Charon and Pierre Bayle made use of skepticism for combating medieval scholasticism and the Church. In the 18th century, skepticism was revived in the agnosticism of Immanuel Kant, and an attempt to modernize ancient skepticism was made by Gottlieb Schultz, in Sidonus. The arguments of skepticism were used by the Machists, Neo-Kantians and other idealist philosophical schools from the middle of the 19th to the beginning of the 20th century. Epicureanism, the doctrine of the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus of the 4th to 3rd centuries B.C. and his successors. The aim of philosophy, according to this doctrine, was man's happiness, freeing him from suffering and enabling him to attain a state of bliss. It taught that philosophy was called upon to overcome obstacles to happiness, the fear of death due to ignorance of the laws of nature and giving rise therefore to belief in supernatural, divine forces. As regards the theory of knowledge, Epicurus was a sensationalist. He supposed that very subtle images proceed from things and penetrate the human soul through the sense organs. Conceptions of things are formed on the basis of the sensuous perceptions of the soul, in which memory preserves only the general features of images. Epicurus regarded sense perceptions themselves as the criterion of truth, and he considered that the source of errors lay in the accidental character of individual sensations or in the over-hasty formation of judgments. The idealists, who distorted the teaching of this great materialist of ancient Greece, made more attacks on Epicureanism than on the other philosophical theories of antiquity. In the definition of sensationalism quoted by Lenin, Frank rightly regards Epicureanism as a variety of it, but he draws an incorrect distinction between Epicureanism and objective materialist sensationalism.